Fantastic. Welcome to everybody who's currently joining. We're just going to give it a few minutes to allow everybody to filter in, and then we will get going with today's session. If you want to, in the chat, just comment where you're dialing in from. It'd be really good to see where we're getting people, especially from a virtual perspective. It's always interesting to know where everybody's at. I'm in the northeast of England. It's bright, but it's cold. So I've chose to stand up for today's session. Keep me moving, keep me warm. That and the fact that I can't sit still at these type of events either.
That's an excellent idea. We've got some interesting locations: Pennsylvania, Ontario, Luxembourg, the East Midlands, Warwick Hospital so far. So yeah.
Spain, Canada, Bulgaria. Goodness me.
Amazing.
Fellow Bristolian in on the chat there, Joel. Welcome.
Amazing. We'll give it one more minute just for everybody to settle in. Because technology does work a little bit slower when it's trying to get the volume of individuals through, but we are honoured that you've chose to take either your lunch break, so hopefully you're able to eat while you're listening to this, or to be able to fully absorb in this session. It is being recorded, just so that you're aware, and we'll go into some more details about that shortly. So if you do happen to need to nip out, you can always catch this back on recording. Fabulous. So I think we'll get started now. Move the next slide. So our session today is all about translating awareness into action, and I am here today with Jem, who will be helping me co-chair this event, and we've also got some fabulous panelists, and I can't wait to get this conversation started today. I'm just going to pass over to Jem now for some housekeeping.
Hello, yep, my name is Jem. My pronouns are they, them, and I am ADHD. To give a bit of context, so I am the advice business partner at Business Disability Forum, and we work very closely with Lexxic. BDF is one of the leading organisations to support workplaces with their disabled employees, in case you weren't sure who we were. Just to let you know, with the housekeeping, the captions are enabled, and this session, as mentioned, is being recorded, and it's going to be available to any participants for 2 weeks. If you've signed up, you're going to receive a link to access it afterwards. We'd love for you to share any of your thoughts, your own experiences in the chat. Obviously, it can get a little bit lively, so if it's distracting, don't worry about that. You can just feel free to have that switched off. If you've got any questions, if we could ask you to use the Q&A function, so that's different from the chat. If you look along the bottom of the Zoom sort of icons, you'll find a Q&A button there, and we will try and answer as many of these as we can. We'll put some to the panelists, and any others that we can't answer are going to be answered by Melissa O'Brien, who's one of Lexxic's psychologists, and Shauna Carden, one of Lexxic's business development managers. The session is going to run for 90 minutes, about halfway through or near enough where it's appropriate. We're going to take a 5-minute break. But if you do need to pop away at any moment, don't worry, you can do that, and you'll be able to catch up on anything that you've missed by watching the recording. So yeah, just to hand back to Abby.
Fantastic. So I'm Lexxic. I have put on this event. We've teamed up, and I myself am a consulting business psychologist at Lexxic. I have a diagnosis of ADHD and dyslexia, and I used to work initially on our psychology side, so delivering our work needs place assessments, screenings, delivering coaching, so really working on that one-on-one basis. And now I've brought that knowledge into our consultancy offering and support organisations with the education and helping them to develop more inclusive practices. As Lexxic, we empower a neurodiversity mindset within the workplace, and we do this from an as from an organisational level as well. And we're now working globally, so supporting lots and lots of different people and organisations. And today's session is to support alongside that awareness of ADHD and some of the misconceptions we often hear. And it's about getting that positive experience across and listening to people's lived experience. And I do want to highlight that the information from each of our panelists, including ourselves as co-chairs, is our own lived experience and what we've been through from a personal perspective. We do appreciate different people will have different experiences throughout their life with this, and different people that they might connect with. So just be aware of this and be kind to each other within the chat as well. When you are sending questions, bear in mind as well that this can be quite overwhelming for us, which is why we do have our support system in the background. So if you don't get a question answered specifically in quick time, it just might be that we've missed it because the chats in these events just go mad. And it's difficult for us to keep on top of that while remembering what we're trying to say in the conversation and to keep to a time limit as well. So please do be kind to us today. So I just wanted to briefly touch upon some things that can impact individuals with ADHD, and it's just getting that awareness out there that it's not just this hyperactivity side of things or the attention deficit side. It can impact our emotions, the way that we build relationships in all aspects of our life. Things when we're at work can be impacted, or education when you're trying to train. And I think there's a lot of us who have lots of qualifications, myself included, and I'm now currently doing my doctorate, which I started in January after giving birth in February. So yeah, take things on quite quickly, but I'm managing it. I'm being able to deal with distractions, also diet, and the food side of things, and making sure we're getting enough fluids in and so on. Sleep can be detrimental for some individuals as well, and also stress. And from my perspective, the reason that I wanted to share this part is that, yes, there are lots of aspects people will resonate with when it comes to ADHD, but it's about remembering for individuals with a diagnosis often have a severity in these areas that impact them on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to it just being a one-off that you can maybe overcome. Sometimes these can be really overwhelming for individuals who have a diagnosis. So it's really about being understanding and supportive with this conversation as we move through today's session. So there's a couple of myths that we often hear. ADHD is a real disorder. What I should have put in there, and that's typical of my dyslexia, is the myth is it's not a real disorder. It is not a myth that it is a real disorder. And ADHD is where these serious deficiencies in attention and behavioural inhibition can occur. So it's more than just what you sometimes hear stereotypically. It's not an excuse for laziness. The symptoms do impact the way that the brain transmits effectively, and that can be getting in the way for some people. Everybody has a little bit of ADHD. That's something that I've just mentioned prior, and people can exhibit these behaviours to a greater intensity and severity than people without ADHD. And it's about the structure and volume and chemical activity in the way that our brains work that impacts us on a day-to-day basis as well. So I'm going to move from that part because I'm just so excited to introduce our panelist today, and I will give them a little bit of time to introduce themselves, and I'll leave this slide up just while they're introducing, and then I'll pull the slides down so you can fully see everybody's face while we're having these conversations. So Natalie, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, hello. I'm Tania Gerard. I am head of practice at the Business Disability Forum. Lots of work experience, I suppose, from an inclusion point of view. So many years worked in various industries, in terms of diversity and inclusion. But my lived experience is that my son has ADHD, autism and dyspraxia, sometimes known as DCD. So we've been through many years of difficulties through school systems and support. So I joined the Children's Society a couple of years ago, a charity for children's mental health, which his mental health was really severely impacted. But now he's joining the workplace, and I saw an opportunity to join the Business Disability Forum, having worked with them previously on a couple of things. And here we focus in on employees and customers' experience of inclusion and their inclusion in when they're purchasing products, or when an employee is coming into an organisation and may need additional support. So my personal lived experience is that after many years of focusing in on my son and my other son who has dyslexia, my doctor said, have you not realised that you probably have ADHD? So I'm currently waiting for an official diagnosis, but I've gone through the first stages of that and it looks pretty confirmed, which does make lots of sense to me now. So yeah, lots of experience to bring to the panel. I'm really excited about the conversation today.
Amazing, thank you. And thank you for being open and sharing this as well from a parental perspective, because I think there'll be a lot of people in the audience who will really associate with that, because we definitely find that is happening more and more as parents are supporting their children. They're kind of realizing some of these tendencies maybe themselves and going through that process, which is difficult enough when you're supporting your child, but then to have to go through that yourself as well. So yeah, I think what you have to say will be really helpful today. And Tania, we'll come to you next.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, my name's Tania Gerard. I am the founder of Tania Gerard Digital, and I am a neurodiversity trainer, podcast host, keynote speaker, and ADHD and autism advocate. And we supply workshops and marketing services to basically bridge that gap of communication between employee and employer. So our workshops are very interactive, very fun. You learn the foundations of neurodiversity, what it looks like, communication preferences, and then we dip into a more tailored experience of what your business can actually do, e.g. if you have a room that you aren't using right now, that could be used as a quiet space. Do you have any policies in place? So they're the type of workshops. And then our accessible marketing service is analysing your websites for like clients, designs, and kind of like analysing that content. Is there any alt text on images? So it's a bit more of a technical service, our accessible marketing. But yeah, it is. I have ADHD and autism. I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child and then autism later on in life, which is a very unique experience. But yeah, I absolutely love what I do. I love helping people. It changes lives, and I'm really proud and honoured to be here in this webinar today.
Thank you. And we're honoured to have you here as well, and all the experience that you're going to bring to this. And now that this experience has led you to go help other people as a kind of career, there's a lot to be said about that, and that kind of passion and drive and support. So I have no doubt this is going to be really helpful for our audience as well. So thank you for joining us.
I hope so. Thank you.
Tom, last but very not least.
Thanks, Abigail. My name's Tom Vodden. I'm a relative newcomer to the team at Lexxic in the role of consulting business psychologist. I'm fortunate enough that Lexxic have agreed to allow me to work relatively flexibly, so I continue to work as a consultant within the education sector, which is where my professional background kicked off as a teacher in both mainstream and special educational needs settings in the UK and Australia. I draw on psychological theoretical frameworks. I have an MS or a master's in psychology of education. I've just concluded a master's in occupational psychology. I also work supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, having run my own business for over 20 years within the education sector. I'm a diagnosed ADHD. I refer to myself using identity first language. We may get onto that. Some people prefer to say they are an individual with ADHD. I call myself an ADHDer. I have combined type ADHD, and my ADHD assessment was spectacularly successful when compared with my education career to date, which I passed with flying colours, which along with some of the other panelists probably wasn't a great surprise. I also have lived experience as a parent of 2 children with neurodevelopmental conditions as well. So hopefully I'll be able to make a contribution from a few different angles, and looking at some of the questions coming in on the Q&A or in the chat. There's quite a lot of ground I think we're going to be able to cover, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And I did pre-warn everybody at the beginning, this is a fantastic panel. I'm super excited for us now to get into this. So thanks, Tom. And as I've said, we'll be asking the panel some thought questions, and then we will open it up to audience questions later. So if you do have specific questions, do direct them to the Q&A box, so it doesn't get missed within the chat, which I can see is very busy at the moment, but I'm trying to pretend it's not there, if I'm honest. So the first question is to Jem, and I wanted to ask you, what do you find is one of the biggest barriers when working with organisations when it comes to neurodiversity?
Thanks, Abigail. Well, it seems like I've written a very sensible sentence, so I'll read that out first and then I'll kind of go into that. So one of the biggest barriers I found sort of at BDF and working with organisations is sort of the fear within organisations, or particularly with individuals, about getting things wrong when talking about disability and particularly neurodiversity. But unless you start that conversation, obviously nothing ever changes. So one of the things I most frequently come across is when I've sort of worked on the advice service, is sort of line managers calling up, not understanding sort of why their neurodivergent colleagues are behaving in sort of what seems to them like very unusual, and you know, they can't explain sort of their behavior. So I think it's kind of just making sure people don't have that fear or around having the conversation in the first place. I think people can get worried about, you know, we've talked a bit here about identity first language, and not everybody's familiar with that kind of concept. We're all very embedded in this kind of world of disability and EDI and HR and things like that, and we're probably very, very familiar with those kinds of things. But for someone who's just kind of, you know, if you're a retail manager or something like that, and your priority is about, you know, selling things in a shop, you might not be very, you know, you might not have access to this kind of information or those kinds of things. So I think the way that BDF works is we're kind of like this critical friend, and we don't mind if you get things wrong. You can talk to us and use the wrong terminology and not be sure and question, and it's an opportunity to sort of start that conversation. So I think, yeah, the barriers are sort of, confusion and fear. I think we've kind of got a bit past the idea of stigmatization of things. I think people know, or it feels to me, as from a personal experience, that, you know, we're better at sort of identifying and knowing we should be helping and supporting people with their careers if they're disabled or have neurodivergent conditions. But the sort of gap that's there is like, how, you know, this webinar is called Translating It into Action, you know, and it's those tangible kind of things that are really, we need to sort of like start pushing more and sort of starting getting people confident about, I think.
Yeah, it's good that you say that, because I think sometimes it's just having the conversation rather than putting that fear in place, because if you're going into the conversation because you want to be educated, then that's a good way to come into the conversation and to kind of eliminate some of that fear. Amazing. So my next question is for Tania. So as you've mentioned, you have your own business now, and I just wondered, what message would you like to tell the audience who are maybe thinking about talking to their employers about neurodivergence?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that you are the expert of your own experience when it comes to neurodiversity. So approach the conversation with confidence and self-advocacy, and, you know, start by framing your neurodivergence as an actual strength, which is 100% it is, you know, and share those unique views and skills that come with it, you know, and explain how they can be an asset to the role that you're in right now. I would say be specific about the support and the adjustments that you need in the workplace to make you work the best to your ability, you know, whether that's more clearer communication, you know, flexible hours, a workspace that reduces distractions, like a quiet room, like I mentioned earlier. You know, your employer, really important to remember though, that your employer doesn't want to hear problems, they want solutions. So it's really important to keep this in your mindset, because if you think about in terms of your employer, it's all good hearing problems, but they need those actionable solutions to actually set it in place for you. And I also think providing resources about neurodiversity can help, as well as like a visual for your employers and other colleagues as well. And I think it'll help them understand more what you're going through. But finally, it's important to remember that this is a collaborative conversation where you and your employer can work together to build an environment that supports your strengths. Being open about your needs, you're not only advocating for yourself, but you're actually helping to create a more inclusive workplace for others as well. And you know, guaranteed there will be another neurodivergent in your team, whether they know they're a neurodivergent or not, that hasn't yet found their voice. So you're also helping them as well. And like I said, the company is being inclusive as a whole.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting where you say like what support you need. And I think one thing that I've always learned from coaching and working with organizations, is what's the challenge? Why is it a challenge for that individual? And then that collaborative conversation of, okay, what can we maybe put in place? Because I think for some organizations, they don't know what that support might look like. And the same for some individuals, they might not even know what that support looks like because they've never been shown the different things that are available or what could be put in place, or maybe a fear from a personal perspective is, how do I ask for this support without looking like I want everything to be changed for special treatment? Which
it's making that case as well, not just about you, but for the company as a whole. So it's doing that research that all of us ADHD people love doing, research down to the rabbit hole and find out what's out there, because there are more resources than people think as well. So it's making that case, really, I always say.
Definitely.
And you can talk to a friend and family as well about your ideas.
100%. And it does go with the theme of this as well, as translating into action. And sometimes people just need that knowledge, and hopefully people will get a lot of that from today's session and put that in place. Natalie, drawing on your experiences, what do you think it's helpful for people to know in order to translate this knowledge into action?
I think just building on Tania's point, actually, in terms of that lived experience, I think having the culture within your organisation of trust and openness and honesty, where people are sharing their lived experience, is really key. So building that environment from a culture point of view is really important. On the other hand, I think actually Tania's point, absolutely, from an employee point of view, is thinking about kind of what you can bring. But a lot of the time, I suppose what we're seeing is that people are being diagnosed later on in life, and sometimes, you know, this is a shock, or actually they're processing that. So it's actually a collaboration, isn't it? You know, Tania's point is absolutely spot on. But also from an employer's point of view, it's then a little bit daunting to have that conversation, isn't it? Like, where do I start? What can I offer? So it is about those open questions. It is about being open to a discussion. It's a collaboration. You might test and learn things, and they don't work, and that's okay. It is just about testing and learning. But before going into that conversation, make sure that you know your policies. What's your organisation's stance on that, and what is the support that you have internally? You know, is it that you've got an EAP service that is there? You know, more often than not, we now have networks. You know, actually, is there a network that you can collaborate with? But I suppose it's okay to get it wrong. But if you're doing that together in a collected environment, then there is no fear of failure. It's about doing what's best for the person and what's best for your team. So yeah, I think it just building on Tania's point, really.
Oh, that's amazing. Tom, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I've just been taking notes, unusually for me. So I'm just looking at some scribbles there and actually looking over at the chat as well. I'm just picking up, Vicky in the chat said, late diagnosed, still in the denial stage, not sure where I'm at. And I think This is really important. I've just undertaken a piece of research looking at the experiences of late diagnosed ADHDers in the workplace. And what struck me about those interviews, all of the participants in the study had been diagnosed within the last 2 years. And there was something in those interviews which was a conversation really about disclosure. And I think it's suggested that disclosure in the workplace is helpful, and I think in the right environment it's helpful. But I think what we need to be cautious of is the huge amount of stigma and discrimination there is around ADHD at the moment, which really has an impact on the way that people are able to understand their own diagnosis and processing some of the very negative messages that are swirling around in the media, particularly at the moment, which are really unhelpful. So Vicky, I think your post in the chat resonated with me in one of the interviews that I conducted in my research, where that self-denial is in part, I think, impacted on by some of these messages in the mainstream press, which really question the validity of an ADHD diagnosis. And I think it's worth really pointing. Professor Russell Barkley is one of the leading figures in ADHD research, talks about people who sort of ADHD deniers as demonstrating a tremendous degree of scientific illiteracy. And I think he's right, but that's the backdrop to our experience. So the advocacy thing, I think, is important, that we are self-advocating as much as we can. But equally, there is this bit about, for some people, whilst the diagnosis is helpful for self-understanding, there is this bit about us needing help to understand that. So this idea of kind of psychosocial education for employers to not assume that the ADHD is the expert in their condition is really, really important, because the reality is that once you've had your ADHD diagnosis, you're probably given a couple of photocopied sheets of A4 and sent on your way. So there's a bit of work, I think, around the coaching space, helping people to understand their diagnosis and put them in a position to be able to advocate, because they may not know what they want.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that from my coaching experience. Is once you've got the diagnosis, then what? It just seems to stop at that point. And unless you have that support network or within your workplace, they have these options to be able to follow on with coaching. A lot of my coaching clients, it's been helping them to understand the what now, after, and how does that apply, and the strengths that individuals have to it. And it's not all these negative connotations that we keep hearing about. Yes, we do experience them, but they do not define who we are as a person. And I think you're right, that does impact that kind of disclosure piece as well. Gemma, I want to see what your thoughts are on this as well.
I'm listening quite carefully. I was just going to say a quick note sort of on some language, really, I suppose. At BDF, we sort of encourage people to use the term share rather than disclose, because if you're disclosing something, it's almost like disclosing a secret, and that can sort of feel, often just changing that language, for example, in your policies and your data monitoring and things like that, it's one of the biggest pieces that can really impact how, the rates at which people share their experience, or tell, something like that. Those kind of like sort of friendlier kind of terms. It sort of then doesn't make disability as stigmatized. It's not like you're disclosing or declaring, nothing to declare, like you're walking through the airport or something. It's like that idea that you're just sharing a bit of information about yourself. So that's kind of one point I was going to sort of just add in there as a sort of BDF perspective. But I was just sort of reflecting on some of the things that are being said in here, and I was thinking about the sort of additional sort of baggage you can carry if you have like traveled your whole life not really understanding that you might be have a neurodivergent condition. And sort of, somebody sort of mentioned in there something about going through formal procedures. I myself have experienced things like that, because we can be misdiagnosed. I think we spoke about this in our kind of pre-meet, so I'm going to touch on it now. We sort of can be misdiagnosed, particularly AFAB, that's assigned female at birth people, are often misdiagnosed with all kinds of like personality disorders and other mental health conditions. And I think we talked about how we've all sort of had some sort of experience where we've been given different types of, even the wrong kind of therapy can be incredibly damaging. So by the time we get to having our diagnosis, not only are we kind of having to deal with this kind of major life shift in terms of like the lens by which we view ourselves, we also probably have a lot of like accumulated trauma and sort of other issues that we might have picked up on the way through kind of, attempts to cope, So there's such a big piece around, like, and it's not necessarily even like getting a formal diagnosis, just recognizing. I think, I found sort of within community, it's just, all of my friends are queer. We are all neurodivergent. It's not an accident. We're very good at community building. We're very good at kind of communication within sort of our own sort of mindset of people, I think. And it's like, it's this whole piece, like you're saying, yeah, the psycho, sorry, I forgot how you said, but like looking at that education piece, but also looking at the support network as well, because it can be isolating. We can make ourselves unpopular at work if we don't understand how to navigate like social hierarchies, office hierarchies, work hierarchies, whatever. We can end up in a bit of a messy state by the time we get our diagnosis. And so we're really building all kinds of other things, as well as going, oh, how can I like submit my work on time? Like that's probably like the least of your worries in a way, because you look, but we can have end up typically, this is just my experience and my friends, in quite chaotic kind of types of lifestyles until you understand what is going on for you. So I think it's a very, very big piece, and I think yeah, that's my reflections there in a very broad, galaxy brained kind of stroke.
No, I love it. We're just all being truly authentic to ourselves here, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that are navigating it. And bravo to those of you that are looking at the chat, because it's got the fear in me. I can't navigate over to that bit. I'm twiddling with a pen, which will shortly not have the little clip on because it'll be snapped off very shortly.
Someone's just asked if I've got a fidget toy. Yes, I do. It won't go in focus because of this blurred screen thing, but it's very useful and very fun.
See, always sharing. Gem, I think it's over to you.
It is, yes. No? This one's going to go to Natalie first, if that's all right. What would you like to see employers doing differently to embrace and better understand ADHD?
Firstly, loved what you just said. It basically summed up me. And yeah, I love working with you. And that's, myself and Gem obviously have our personal reasons why we joined the Business Disability Forum, and it's to make these sorts of differences where we can share this lived experience, but also can impact on kind of how that can be translated into the workplace. Hence we're here. So I suppose for me, it's about building on what Gem said, really, and everybody else has said, treating everybody as an individual. It's all very well having a policy, but actually, there are a lot of blurred lines, and for us it isn't straightforward. It can be that there is all of what Gem described that's been going on, and there is incredible talent, and from my perspective, lived experience, my son's come out of school having had quite a traumatic time actually, in terms of building confidence and his own mental health. Found a brilliant school, very lucky in the last couple of years, but he's going into the workplace now. So actually him being able to disclose to a future employment, or share, as we would rather say, is so important, because, it's taken a long time to get to this point for him to be able to share where he's at. So actually being able to share that to an employer, those spaces have to be created. So from my perspective, it's about creating that culture again, but safe spaces. As Gem rightly said, we need communities. I've heard the term in the past about communities raise children. Well, communities raise all sorts of things, and actually I would not have got an ADHD diagnosis for my son had it not been for a network group at one of my past employers. I went along, autism was the diagnosis. I listened, thought, this is not just autism I'm dealing with here. Actually, it's ADHD, and that has changed his life. He's now on medication, which is a long process anyway, but it's changed his life. And for me, that safe space in an organisation, being allowed the time to be able to talk with colleagues, that I wasn't the only carer in that position. Now I'm not the only person with ADHD in my organisation is really key. Obviously plugging Business Disability Forum, but we're the subject matter experts on it. You're not in this on your own. If you don't know, and it's not, you're fearful of asking questions, we've got loads of resources. We've got an advice service that's there to help. You're not in this on your own. It's a family. We're a collaborative area where we can come and help your organisation to have a look. And also, I think empowering line managers. One of the big things I see is processes and policies that tie everybody up in knots. Why do we do that? Like, if it's really needed to get, you know, an adjustment in place that's very expensive and, you know, got to go through access to work, fair enough. But actually, most of the time, it's small tweaks. Don't put in a process that is so debilitating for your managers that they don't feel empowered to have these conversations. Actually having the ability to be able to adjust and flex, and there's often a fear, if I do it for one, I've got to do it for everybody else. No, that's not the case. Everybody's different. Everybody is different. So having parameters to work with is great. But you know, if you can put in a empowering policy rather than a debilitating one, brilliant.
I love that.
Sorry, I muted myself there. For a change. So yeah, I think Tania, do you want to sort of reflect on that as well? Do you have, what do you see in sort of in your work? What are sort of the meaningful changes? I totally echo there what Natalie's saying. It's so much to do with, like, you know, getting that information down to the sort of granular level and sort of like line management. But what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It starts from the top, you know, and I think I'd love to see employers take a more individualized, flexible approach to when it comes to ADHD. Like, one size, one solution, it doesn't fit all. So creating environments where people work in ways that suit their strengths is super crucial. It allows them to feel safe, to be themselves. It can be very, very lonely when you have ADHD. You know, I call it the bees in your head. Like, you are constantly thinking, you are constantly self-doubting. So feeling safe and not as lonely in the workplace is really bloody important. Excuse my French. You know, it means offering those flexible working hours, adjusting deadlines based on how people manage their focus and energy, allowing for those alternative communication styles that might better fit how someone with ADHD processes information. And I think it's also important that employers invest in learning about ADHD from credible sources, not just listening to the stereotypes and stigma that surround ADHD. I know we're unfortunately in a world where it's so much more easier to think about the negatives more than the positives, but this is life-changing stuff. It's educating yourself, it's encouraging that regular training, those open communications, open discussions that can really help shift those perceptions, you know, and it's making it easier for people with ADHD to speak up about what they need without fear of judgment or discrimination, which is one of the hardest things. And when employers are open-minded in understanding neurodivergence, they're not only creating a more inclusive workplace, but also it allows the team who are thinking creatively, who are thinking outside the box, the confidence to actually bring those amazing ideas to the table. You know, you don't know who has that 50 grand idea. And if you're telling them to stay in their lane and not have that open discussion with you, you're probably, in a essence, losing money as an employer as well, because when there's a problem, we'll probably have a good 5 solutions sometimes in the back of our heads. But if we don't have the confidence to say that to employers, it's a missed opportunity, and it's a missed opportunity to feel safe as well in our working environment. So definitely open communication and education is key.
I think that's a really interesting point. I was sort of thinking about, you know, one of the sort of, you know, it's often assessed on sort of deficits, isn't it? Kind of neurodivergence. But I was thinking, like, you know, actually, when we look at those people who are in those very top positions, those kind of entrepreneurs, they are disruptors. But then if you're in the wrong role and you're sort of perceived as disruptive because you're like, I've got an idea, yeah. And it's, you know, it's kind of getting that education around. I think I was thinking about as well, like, you know, we often ask a lot of why questions, which are perceived as kind of critiques and sort of like attempts to undermine if it's, you know, and I think it's getting that understanding that, you know, that's generally, I would say it's because I want to try and do things better, or I want to get the thing fixed. But I think often there's a misconception about why we might be sort of perceived, you know, perceived as being disruptive. There's also somebody that said in the chat as well about, you know, that's kind of a misconception about, you know, everybody needing to be treated equally. Obviously, we know, like, that actually it's not about being treated equally, it's about equity. So it's, you
Yeah.
know, getting that education piece, like you said, Tanya, about making line managers understand what adjustments are for, why they're there.
Yeah.
You know, it's getting that idea of like sort of fairness and equalness out of their head, and sort of like the idea of what equity is, which is often totally misunderstood, I think.
Yeah,
Tom,
I
did you
agree.
want to sort of jump in on this at all?
Yeah, I will. Sorry, just unmuting my microphone again. Just sort of a couple of things that I've noted down there. I think there's a few things here. On one level, again, going back to something slightly higher up the chat, this is one of the real challenges, I think, you know, for those people with a neurodevelopmental condition of any kind, in this case, we're talking about ADHD, is where's a perception that people are high functioning. There's no association with any kind of struggles within the workplace. And I think, you know, that's one of those really important stereotypes to kind of challenge it. You know, we're talking about a hidden disability here. There are reasons why people's perceptions of those with a hidden disability come with a greater degree of stigma and discrimination than those with a physical disability. In relation to workplace adjustments, what employers need to get their heads around is this isn't about providing adjustments that allow people to work less badly in a way that didn't work for them in the first place. This is about making adjustments to working practice so people can play to their strengths. So I think that's something that people really need to grasp. I think the other bit about this as well is that we can talk about line managers needing greater awareness. At a strategic level within a business, what needs to happen is line managers need to be given the time to support people in their team to be able to work in a way which is going to suit them. And I think line managers are often under a huge amount of pressure to be delivering on KPIs within a business. And those KPIs aren't always around supporting members of their team and the success that they have in helping somebody with a neurodevelopmental condition through a tricky time. So there are a number of dimensions, I think, to this that we really need to consider. And I think the space that line managers are given to support is really imperative. And I think the other bit about this as well is that when we're putting in place reasonable adjustments and making suggestions to colleagues within our teams, is that they are given the time to learn the reasonable adjustments that we are suggesting might be helpful to them. Because to simply say, oh, by the way, crack on with your work and learn how to do all of this stuff that's going to help you with your work, is essentially just adding another job to probably a job list which is already quite tricky. So it's a really complex thing, this, I think, in terms of getting it right, and the interrelationship between all of these different systems, between the individual and the managers and the broader organization, is quite a complex one to unpick.
And I think that's something that we see within our work when we're there to support organisations from both our part and from the BDF, in being there to support with that knowledge, because it is quite a big thing, and for some it can be real scary for organisations. But actually, when you've got the support of those with the knowledge and the experience to support, we can definitely see that massive change. Now, I am a bit of a timekeeper, and I know that we're slightly getting to about our halfway, and I know that there's lots of questions already in the Q&A, so I do want to make sure we get to that. So I'm just going to ask my next question to you all, but just maybe a one-word answer, if that's okay. I'm sorry to really ram that down. You can have 2 or 3 words, I'll be generous. But Tom, do you have any advice for individuals who want to be a good ally to individuals with ADHD?
Be curious and be accepting, and I think, you know, don't allow somebody's obvious strengths to diminish things which are can be very real struggles.
Yeah, thank you. And then Natalie, I have next.
I would say if you're in a position in your organisation that can influence network groups and allyship there, then great. Learn, listen, and empathise. Obviously, everybody is different, but having somebody that is prepared to listen is really important. So you have the ability to myth bust across your organisation if you hear something that isn't quite right when it comes to that. And I think what's been really important for me personally is people recognizing my burnout. So I'm very, very, very fast, and people think that that's really successful. And I saw in the chat, that's led to a lot of success for people, myself included. I don't see when I'm teetering on the edge of burnout. So being there and knowing your colleagues and knowing your team is really important to be able to go, are you okay? And then question again, no, but are you really okay? So yeah, hopefully that's
I like that. I think from a mental health perspective, that's something that I've picked up, is don't just ask the once, maybe ask it again, because I'm definitely someone, if you ask me a question, I'll say yes or I'll say no, but I'll not have really listened to what you've just asked me. It's just my instinct is just to say yes or no, when actually if you take me a minute to slow down, then I might be able to. And I do say with hyper focus, it is a strength, but it can also be there as a challenge when you're so hyper focused, you don't eat, you don't drink, hours have gone by, and you're just like, where is that? But you're in that mindset and you've maybe done a week's worth of work in a day because you've just been on it. But it's where do we recoup that energy to prevent that burnout? Because sometimes if we get on a roll, that can be quite challenges as well. Tania, to you.
A few words I would say is active listening. Have that open mindset to understanding. I would say ask questions, and kind of do lots of research, listen to podcasts. There's so many of an influx of ADHD podcasts now. Not every style is going to suit your ears, but you will find one that suits you. And just be a good human. I think really it's just being kind. Always be kind to everyone, but ADHD, it's not all sunshine and roses, and a little bit of kindness goes a long way.
Amazing, thank you. Jem? I know you weren't down to answer this, but I know we're ready for a bit of a 5-minute break now.
I think I was answering something like this yesterday, and it was asking like what would have. I was thinking about how I would have benefited from an ally. I think I've had to be my own ally for like so much of it, and I think there can be a sort of like hyper independence that can develop, especially like, I don't know. I think, if we're all kind of perfectionists, we're very fast humans, and I think, yeah, it's that thing of, having somebody that you trust to step in. I think places like earlier on in my career, for example, I was very confused about how to get things done. My idea would be to like get something fixed. I go straight to the CEO because I'm like, well, they've got the most power. I'll go there, which is a silly idea, but one we frequently see on the advice service. So it would have been really helpful if somebody had just been really kind and rather gone like, because I remember having somebody that was really unkind to me and basically told me that I would never get anywhere because I was making myself so unpopular. I didn't understand because I was like, I'm just trying to get things done. Like this thing in this shop I'm working in is broken and all of the volunteers are upset and it's cold and why can't we get the thing to work? Nobody is fixing things. If somebody had been kind and just sort of explained to me, your energy might be better spent trying to create a relationship with like your line manager who will then, be an advocate for this and then an advocate. If I had understood how that kind of worked and things have been explained to me, I think there can be a problem with, I know this is more than a few words, we have like spiky profiles and it's like, we can be brilliant at certain things. And so when we don't understand something that seems like really blooming obvious, people just think there must be, why are you doing it? Is you're like sabotaging your career, the company? What's your agenda here? There is no agenda. It might just be have a gap in that kind of area. So I think if somebody had sort of recognized, they're brilliant at all these other things, wonder what's going on there rather than like tell me off and then make me just resent the person that had told me off. Like that would be like a good example of allyship. Somebody being kind, like Tania said, and just sort of spending that time and sort of going, there's something amiss here. Like, let's try and look into that rather than that kind of punitive kind of thing that can happen in sort of organizations. That would have been helpful. I have done too many words and I'm meant to be a co-chair. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. No, it's really interesting. And I kind of put my hand to my mouth then because that's something nobody else has said, but I've done that before where I'm like, well, they're just another human. Like they've reached out and said, if you need us to contact, feel free. And everyone was like, you emailed the owner? And I was like, but yeah, but that's what the email said. Like if we've got any questions, and they were like, no, it doesn't work like that. But I just felt awful for doing it. but that's kind of my impulsive. I'll go into something and they'll be like, oh, if I'd have thought that through, maybe I've jumped over people's heads, but to me that wasn't what I was intending to do. So yeah, that really, really resonated with me in that second. So I thought I'd just explain my little, because obviously I'm very emotive.
I thought you were just shocked about it.
You see it as it goes, but no, I was just like, oh, I'm not the only one who's done this before, which is why these conversations are really good. I am conscious we did have one more question, but I think we did touch upon it just slightly, Tom, and we can obviously come into it a little bit later. But if we take a 5-minute break now while we're at 12:50, sounds perfect for me. And then we'll come back at 12:55 and just give people a time to get away from the screen, digest everything, and then we'll come into some Q&A time. So I will see everybody shortly. I know I'm teetering just on the 50 full, but it's just to give everybody time to get back into the room. There we go.
47 messages in the interim. I'm gonna have a quick look in the minute before we get back. 50.
No, that's fine. If the panel, if you want to have a quick look at the questions that have come in, and if there's any in particular, we can go through those in a second. But I just thought I'd touch upon one that was on there about if there's any discussion on ADHD combined with other neurodivergence as well. As some of us have mentioned within the panel, we do have more than one diagnosis to our name, probably a few more if we went into that in detail maybe. But as this is an ADHD panel event, that's why most of this conversation is focused on the ADHD side of it. We do other webinars on different topics, but just to make you aware, that's why we haven't touched upon it, but we are very much aware that individuals may have different diagnosis within there. But I just thought I'd just quickly mention on that one for anybody asking on that one. I don't know if I don't want to put anybody on the spot by asking if you've got any questions. I think there were a few that have been kindly directed already to individuals within the panel. Jem, I wonder if you wanted to answer any. I know you've had a quick look.
Okay, so there was one that was direct. The question to Jem: how do you find trying to explain being neuroqueer? So yeah, I think when you have kind of an intersectional kind of identity, so that's you're disabled and you've got some sort of additional sort of characteristic, it can be kind of I think I felt like even more of an alien in some environments, because it's just like not only does my brain work differently, I probably communicate in a slightly idiosyncratic way, but also I've got something perceived as being sort of an unusual gender and an unusual sort of choices of partner. So I think you can, like I was sort of saying earlier, you can have all these additional kind of things. So you've had the trauma of coming out more than once, and then you're coming out with like a disability, and then you're coming out with like all those kinds of things. It can be a lot. I mean, I've just basically found from a personal level, like Tom was saying, you get your diagnosis, you get a couple of photocopied sheets. It's not really enough. I've managed to sort of seek help with, like, I've got a queer autistic therapist, and like that's been one of the best people that I've ever kind of like had therapy with. I think it's finding that support where you need it, essentially. And also just knowing, I think I'm comfortable now. I'm 41 now, so I don't really care about anything, I don't think. And I just sort of kind of like I don't mind. I'm not everybody's flavor. That's okay. But I think, when you are younger and, I all I ever wanted was to sort of fit in. And I just didn't, in so many different ways. But now I sort of like, I'm very, very proud of all these like sort of things that were perhaps perceived as kind of problems, difficulties, things that kept me separate. Like I was saying, you do find your tribe, and it's not necessarily, the more kind of niche you are as a human, the more kind of different labels, I guess, you give yourself, the smaller the sort of crowd might be. And so in a workplace, especially if you're in a small workplace, you might be much less likely to find anybody else that's like you. But, in the rest of my life, almost everybody is we're the same tribe. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, that's it can be more tricky, I think, if you've got additional things going on, or, if you, or not just necessarily characteristics, but if you're a parent, for example, you're trying to sort of like, grasp your own diagnosis and also manage all your children's kind of things, and you're triggering each other, and it's all kind of going off. There can be all kinds of things that make life more complicated when you have sort of some neurodiversity and you're in a world that's not designed for you, essentially. Don't know if that answers it.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting point, though, isn't it, that how valuable, and we've spoken about it a bit today, networks can be, of people who can associate with what you're going through, so you have that connection. And I think it's exactly what you've said to a degree, although it be in a different context, as coaching. I couldn't find coaching helpful, but getting coached from somebody who understands ADHD from that perspective, now I can have a better session because they understand where I'm coming from. And I think that's something that's often overlooked, is especially from therapy perspectives, if that therapist doesn't necessarily understand where you're coming from, that might not be the best for you. And I've always said it's okay to say you're not for me, can I please have somebody different? And I think it's being open to saying this is not working, but they're not completely writing it off. It just might not be the right connection for that point. But thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that will have massively helped a lot of people in the audience there. Does anybody else have a question that they've seen and they would like to answer?
There's a couple I'll pick up on. Abigail, there's one which has been in the chat and in the questions, and it's this question around emotional regulation, which I think is really important. And it is a significant part of ADHD, both in terms of experiencing quite intense emotion and also experiencing kind of rejection. Probably two slightly different things, I think, from a psychological perspective, but the emotional regulation bit, I think, is really important. There was discussions as to whether that would be included in the latest diagnostic criteria for ADHD, and it kind of missed the cut. You know, the reality is it's a very significant part of ADHD. You know, sometimes in terms of emotions that we may associate as being quite negative, like anger, which can be positively used, I think it's important to stress, but also that real passion which can come out in the workplace and perhaps be misunderstood, the want to really contribute and to, you know, say your piece and to get very, very overexcited about things. So understanding that dimension of ADHD is really important for me. And just very briefly on another point that's come up, and Abigail was on your list at the beginning in terms of the slides around myths and stereotypes. This kind of, we're all a little bit autistic, we're all a little bit ADHD, oh, that's my OCD coming out. Often well-intentioned, and I think an indication that people are trying to empathize, but we don't have those conversations in the same way around physiological need, for example. So we don't say, oh, we're all a little bit headachy or we're all a little bit cancery in the same way that we do about something which is neurodevelopmental. So those conversations, I think we need to be mindful of. I think they're often well-intentioned and they come from a good place, but I think they can be quite diminishing of people's lived experiences. So those just a couple of observations in the chat and in the questions that seem to be recurring.
I think Jem mentioned it well earlier as well about the language that we're using. So considering share as opposed to disclosure, and I think it is about learning that language. And I always say whenever I deliver sessions is to ask people how they would like to have that conversation and for it to be approached. I'm being mindful of how, but then again, I always think maybe it's because I've got an ND brain and I think all these things through and how that conversation doesn't only impact me, but it impacts the person and the wider person, and my brain just goes and thinks about all of it. So maybe it is an ND trait in that sense, but just thinking about the impact it could have, and back to what Tania had said earlier about be kind and considerate when we're having these conversations, because we never know what somebody's been through in their life or what that journey has been. A lot of us may mask and be like, yeah, it's all good, I'm fine, and actually deep down it's not fine. That build-up's coming up. So it's, as we do with the mental health side of things as well, it's remembering we're all a person and we've all got feelings and we are individuals, and just taking that into account sometimes I think is what I would say is obvious, but it's really overlooked in many situations with this as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tom. Anybody else? Natalie, have you seen a question?
Yeah, there was a couple on networks.
Tania, I'll come next.
Oh, sorry. And I'd already touched on networks, so I thought I'd just pull those out. So there was one question on small organisations, you know, and if you don't have access to many employees or colleagues in your organisation, what can you do? So attending events like this, I've seen lots in the chat about people sharing details and support mechanisms. Attending events, and sometimes that can be out of our comfort zone, I know, but actually it's really good at making connections and understanding what is out there. There are support groups locally. I would say it's very hit and miss. So that's usually a good way of finding out more. And LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you know, I know that LinkedIn can be a bit overwhelming sometimes too, but actually having a look on LinkedIn, there are different network events where people are, you know, joining up. So have a look. But yes, events such as this where you can find people who are going through similar struggles is important. But obviously Business Disability Forum, there are some free events on there as well on our website. So your organisation may well sign up to those. So there may be someone in your organisation that might be able to help you with that as well. Starting a network, I think, is just creating a inclusive, safe space. That sounds very broad, but that it's open to all and it's in a safe environment. So particularly with ADHD, you may get quite a mix of people that come along, and that everybody, you set the scene that it's kind of Chatham House rules, you know, nothing kind of goes outside of that room, and that it's there for carers, it's there for people that are going through it themselves, it's there to share experiences. So yeah, I think it's just having that safe environment. A lot of things are done online now, but you know, if you're able to, or you're an organisation that does things more in person, then actually having a cup of tea and a piece of cake is always very useful. But yeah, I think it's just being able to publicise that as well, that people feel that they're able to come along and that they have the time. Sometimes in organisations it can be really difficult to get people away from the day job, so having it at different times of the day will help as well.
Yeah, and Tania.
They're not really questions, they're more statements, but they've really caught my eye in the chat. So one says, it's especially hard asking for help when you know that you are asking will make you come across as a nuisance or make the person's job harder. That awareness is crippling. So I think what we need to do in that essence, in that statement, is take a step back and make those tasks like really smaller, manageable bites. So one thing I would do in that mindset is actually talk to someone that you trust. So before going to that director or the manager or even a colleague, like talk to your friend or talk to your parents, someone that you trust that will hold your loyalty. If you have like a work best friend, like, and you know they're not going to be, you know, two-faced or go anywhere, you know, talk to them about their perspective. You know, it's the classic two brains are better than one. And because of our ADHD, where we have multiple voices in our heads and you know, that really negative talk, we almost talk ourselves out of not opening up about our ADHD, and it's just like, oh, it's never going to work, like there's going to be loads of stigma, it's not. So there's a side of having that trust with someone, communicate it, and almost do kind of like a test play of what you want to say to the manager and make a case. But it's also, and it's going to sound really blunt, if your employer, if your company is not open-minded and they are already making you think that you are going to be a nuisance before you've even said anything, that company isn't for you, okay? Because being a neurodivergent, it's really difficult. And these adjustments that we've talked about today on the panel, they are not costly. They are just being a good human and being open-minded. So I would definitely say talk to someone that you trust and that you can build that case for in the background. And then the second one that I noticed was literally straight after, so it's perfect for my eyes, is I fear CBT is not suitable for ND folks. From personal experience, having ADHD as a child and then autism later on in life as well as ADHD, I would say, because it literally means cognitive behavioural therapy, because it's so emotional having ADHD and it affects our behaviour, I would say that it's a long-term relationship. So I know that our time management, and if we're not interested in something fully, it decimates, like we just go on to the next thing. So I think CBT is good when you invest in it for yourself. You also have to be in the mindset that you want to invest in yourself And I have a history of anxiety and depression, and I know how hard it is to get to that stage where you are just starting to feel like you want to better your life. And have those depression dips that you naturally get sometimes with ADHD. I call them byproducts. It's you have to be in the mindset first to help yourself, and then there's so many books as well. There's so many books that you can just do in your own time. And there's really good cognitive behavioral therapists around there as well. So I would say it's good when you have the right mindset and the time to invest in CBT.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say from that perspective as well, because I think you have to be in that right mindset to go into it. And there's been plenty of times I've had coaching sessions and I've had to say to the individual, I'm not really sure when now's the right time to get heavily invested in this. There's other things at play that you might need support with first before moving into that coaching. Because I think, especially from a work perspective, they're often forced in some instances, like, well, now we know it's this, how do we get you support? When are we going to get you that support? Right, so here's the list of things that you've got to do, and we mentioned it earlier. It's just an added list to the list that you've already going on.
It's finding that foundation. It's breaking it down into tasks. If you're not ready to take that step, go down one. It's not wrong. You're building that foundation for yourself, for your life, and at the end of the day, life is too short. So you've got to do it your way. And sometimes it doesn't matter what other people think, because they aren't in your head. You know exactly how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis, in your personal life, in your working life. You're not going to know absolutely everything that you need. But there are research out there. We're all educators on this panelist in our own way. Some of us provide therapy, some of us workshops like myself. So it's that education day by day. Even when you have ADHD, you're not going to know absolutely everything about ADHD. Like us on the panel, we don't know absolutely everything on ADHD. We would never call ourselves experts, because every single day in the world is changing. Scientists are discovering new things. So we only know what we know in the world today. In 5 years' time, there's going to be some more discoveries about ADHD and how it works. So it's bridging that understanding, that communication, and it's just learning and just remembering that it's okay to feel like this. Whatever stage you are with your ADHD education, it's absolutely okay to feel how you're feeling right now, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's just believing in yourself, which again I know is easier said than done, but it's a journey. It's not a destination, it's a journey.
I agree. And I think to one of the first points you meant about organisations, some are not set for individuals to be in that particular organisation, and maybe you do need to look somewhere different. But sometimes it's because they don't have that education, and it's being able to say, I was on a panel event the other day and there's some really good resources. Get in touch with them and get them in the organisation, because that's why we do what we do, is to help change this narrative, to help organisations. And there are many out there that need that additional understanding to be able to support and be seen as an inclusive organisation with the 100%. Practices that they have.
100%.
There is a question that came in because I'm trying to navigate my way through all these realms, and then we'll get ready for some closing remarks. But most attention in the workplace is given to adjustments and how to mitigate the challenges with ADHD. But does anybody have any advice on how to build a workplace that embraces the strengths of neurodivergence? So building teams and how to run meetings, for example. Anybody?
I think. Oh, sorry, Tom. You go ahead.
It's okay. Don't worry. Happy to. I've got a contribution, but yeah, if you want to comment on that, Jem, I can follow on behind.
All right, no problems. I was just going to say, but start, when you're making something, when you're doing something new, start with, disability, neurodiversity in mind from the beginning. We were having a conversation yesterday about buildings, like actual structural physical buildings, but actually the same could be applied to kind of the processes and, your offices and the way you work. Take into account those different perspectives, get feedback from people, find out what it is that would make things work better. Having those conversations, open conversations, use people for their strengths, and consider how you can kind of create an environment that isn't disabling. You know, how do you create an enabling environment? It's going to be different in different organizations and in different jobs, different people, everything, you know, you've got to take into account, and that flexibility of mind is the thing to kind of you know, sort of take into account, I think, just to sort of build on what Tania was saying. But yeah, sorry Tom, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, really at the core of this, we're talking specifically about ADHD, but within the context of neurodiversity. And really, you know, the principles of neurodiversity about difference, not disability. So that really is our starting point with this conversation. People coming out the other end of a diagnosis, that isn't a process of identifying what people's strengths are. Let's face it, it's an interesting process on many levels, but you don't come out of that with a great sense of what you're strong at, because you've been having conversations about things that you struggle with. So with that in mind, I think, and to speak to the question, which I'd picked up on as well in the chat, I'm not a massive fan of psychometric tests, but one of the things that I think psychometric tests and personality assessments are useful to do is to actually start to flip that conversation. So when I look at some of the personality tests that I've undertaken over the recent years, those actually start to shine a light on some of my strengths. And so to speak directly to the question in terms of building teams, when we understand the strengths of a group of people working together on a common goal, we can make that team operate in a really useful way. So there are questions that I have about the use of psychometric tests, particularly in terms of how they're used and their implications for the neurodivergent community. But what I would say is there is an application for those working with individuals to start to flip the narrative, and on a team level to look at what the combined strengths of the teams are. So those are a couple of observations there, really, that I think perhaps speak to that particular question.
I was just going to pick up on that about the sort of psychometric test. We often get questions about that at BDF, and they can, like you say, they can be sort of potentially problematic for some people. But I was just thinking about something that was really helpful for me, which was something called ACT therapy. So it's acceptance and commitment therapy. So that's similar in that it kind of helps you identify your sort of values and your strengths, and that can actually be sort of a very beneficial thing. I think often we might struggle with kind of, you know, feelings, knowing what we're feeling. It's kind of one of the sort of areas that, you know, as people with ADHD, we might sort of not always be able to identify. We get in our heads, we don't get in our bodies, we don't know what we're doing. But I found that really, really helpful as a kind of way of identifying what my kind of core values were and sort of building on that and building that sort of sense of identity. And, you know, it can be really, really, really helpful. I didn't get on with CBT, but I won't go over that. But it's not for everybody. It's picking and choosing the thing that works for you. So obviously for Tom, that was really helpful for you to have those sort of picking out those elements of those psychometric tests that help. But there's lots of different things out there that can help you kind of identify who you are as a person, and it kind of helps you then direct what it is you need, where your strengths are. And then the more confident you are, I think, talking about yourself and who you are, the better you can kind of connect and communicate with other people and hope to kind of influence, you know, the team you're in, your line manager, that kind of thing, I think.
No, I think it's such a good point, because I've said I've been on a self-discovery journey for some time now, to the point where I can be very confident in speaking about my challenges, how they impact me, and what support I need put in place without a fear of judgment, because then I'd be judging me as a person. And that's not fair to me. So it's kind of about having that understanding and that support network around you to allow you to be who you are without fear of trying to fit to social norms or avoid the pitfalls that we might see. So it's really interesting. So I'm going to bring it to a close. So I do apologise to anybody who still has questions in the chat. We won't be able to answer them all now. Please appreciate that if we did take them offline, that would take a lot of time for us to be able to get that into a written context as well. And we have just only allocated the hour and a half for today's session. So thank you, first of all, massively to the panel for being here and sharing your lived experience. I'm sure everybody in the chat has got something that they can take away from this. I'm also to everybody in the audience who's been asking questions and commenting to each other and being really engaged in this. It's really heartwarming to see that this conversation is happening and that we're able to support with that narrative. So yeah, it's been a very enjoyable session to be a part of. I'm with some incredible individuals on this group. So I just wondered, for the last couple of minutes, bearing in mind we do need to shut off at past, just some closing remarks and a final word to leave with the audience for today. And Jem, as my co-chair, sorry, I'll come to you first.
Closing remarks. I think it's just really great, just to go back to that initial point that you asked me about what are the biggest challenges and barriers, and it's like having that conversation. So I think having these conversations, hearing everybody's like really different and varied kind of experiences, and just kind of like, I think it's just really beneficial, like you say, Tom was saying, sort of be curious with yourself, and sort of like create opportunities for that curiosity to develop in other people as well, is like a sort of really, really good way to sort of get that awareness translated into action. So I think, yeah, that would be what I'd say.
Fabulous. No, thank you. And Tom?
I think just really an awareness of those narratives that go on outside the workplace that individuals bring into the workplace with them. And certainly from my research, those are very, very live in terms of the experiences of my research participants and the implications that those have for them in terms of understanding themselves as individuals, but also have a massive, massive impact on the way that they relate to the workplace and their ability to realize their potential. So I think from an employer's perspective, really putting people in a position to challenge some of these stereotypes that they extend back to the 1970s. These things are regurgitated, particularly by people writing editorial in broadsheet newspapers. We've seen the BBC in Panorama investigation last year that was questionably ethical to me. That had very, very significant implications for people, and those kind of stereotypes do nothing to really support this kind of drive towards neurodiversity, which is positive and is starting to take shoot. But there needs to be some fairly forthright challenging of some very outdated and tired stereotypes about ADHD.
That's a good point. I'm Tania.
Yeah, I think neurodiversity, including ADHD, obviously is what we're talking about, is not something to fix. It's something to really value and celebrate. And I think how powerful it is to have the minds that we have, that we see the world differently, that we have changed the world over the years as well, and we've solved problems creatively. We've brought innovation in ways others can't. And that's what individuals with ADHD, bring to the table, their strengths like creativity, like resilience, like hyperfocus. And they're not just advantages, they're catalysts for real change in any workplace, especially. So I'd say it's not enough to be accommodating, we need to be empowering. And I think that means moving beyond tick boxes and asking, how do we make sure, regardless of how they think, can succeed here? And that's personal life as well as the workplace, and it's building those workplaces that don't just tolerate differences but actually thrive. And if you've got ADHD in this panel right now and part of the audience, it's your voice, your way of thinking and your approach to problems are really valued and needed. I know sometimes it might not think it, but it actually is. And for employers, the work starts with them, challenging assumptions, creating flexibility, pushing for understanding. And to finalize, when we empower neurodivergence, we don't just create inclusive workplaces, we create stronger, more innovative and more human workplaces, which at the end of the day, we're all humans, which I know the robots are coming, but we're still humans. And that's something that benefits us all, whether we're neurodivergent or neurotypical people as well.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, Natalie.
I've got 3 points, so I'll try and summarise very quickly. But building, there's a lot of comments on your own self-prejudice and stuff, and building on Tania's point earlier, we're all a work in progress. I don't know any human being that can sit there comfortably and say that they're the finished product. So we're all work in progress. So let's just be a bit kind to ourselves as well as being kind to others.
Yeah.
In terms of being an ally, I've seen kind of in the chat, there's been some about how you support people around you that might be having a bad day or struggling with it. And I think from my point of view, in myself, but also helping my son, has been about helping that person to understand where they're at and not fighting it. So actually, sometimes it's really difficult not to fight it because you don't want to be thinking like this. But actually, our brains aren't broken. We just need some help to understand it, and just some empathy. And then lastly, I think, talking to Tania's point again, if the workplace isn't right for you, leave. I've seen a couple of people disagree with that. It's about where you are. So actually, you know, we've got BDF, we've got fantastic employers that want to know more. But you've got to also be in the right place. So if you're at an organisation that maybe isn't understanding you and you haven't got the energy to be fighting that fight and being an advocate, then that's fine. That's okay. There's lots of organisations. The world is changing. The world does want to know. So don't lose hope. There is somewhere out there for you. And lastly, somebody put in about being an advocate, staying and being an advocate. You be an advocate when you have the right headspace. That could be different one day to the next, but be an advocate when you feel able to. It's a lot of pressure, as Jem said. We spend our life being an advocate for ourselves, so do it when you feel mentally able to do that, and that's not every day. But yeah.
No, amazing. Oh, my emotions are starting to kick in now. I'm right, get it together, Abigail. Today has just been immense. Christ, this always gets me right at the very end. I don't know why. I hold it together the whole time and then the emotions start flooding in of just warmth and authenticity. And I want so many other people to feel the same way that we can feel, to be able to voice this and to share this. And I know from being me a while ago, that wasn't me, and lived a lot of shame and kind of, what's wrong with me? Why am I being viewed wrong? Like, I'm not a bad person, but what are you seeing that I'm not able to see to do something about it? And actually, it's understanding that some of the traits we may show, we can tweak them to support ourselves and move forward with that understanding of why we do sometimes what we do. And not having those conversations means we don't always know what that looks like. So it goes back to that being kind, as you've said, to yourself and to other people, because we don't know what stage of a journey anybody's on. And I think just having this panel and people speaking, and that we can be successful in what we do, and we might just need to re-navigate ourselves into different roles, like for yourself, Jem and Natalie, falling into the amazing organisation you're currently in, and for me and Tom to be in an amazing organisation, and also for Tania to set up her own organisation. It really is powerful stuff. And I'm thrilled that we've had so many people actually stay right till the very last minute. And for those of you that are watching on the recording, we hope you've enjoyed this session too. This will be available from a recording for 2 weeks. So do try and schedule in some time if you do want to re-watch it back maybe, and just absorb it, and yeah, let us know how you found the session. But we hope you found it as interesting as I imagine everybody else has. And I'm gonna bring it down because I'm starting to waffle to stop myself crying because it has been really emotional. But yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled with you guys and how you've responded to this session. And yeah, just thank you so much for giving your time to join. And we're in on just a couple of minutes left. I can't believe I've managed to rein it in. So yeah, that's where the structure and organisation of my life kicks in for what once upon a time would have been absolute chaos, rambling, and I'd have never got through half of this. So thank you for bearing with us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.